Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Krishnanand, uh, Professor and Head of Oral Pathology, Dayanand Sagar College of Dental Sciences. I, along with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Praveena, a very ardent and dedicated NMO member, will be moderating today's interesting and very important training session for all the doctors who've joined us through the BJYM helpline, medical helpline. As we all know, we are in the midst of an unprecedented health crisis, the corona pandemic. We've been stretched to our limits of our health facilities not once, but twice in a span of just over 1 year. From March of 2020 till today, India has recorded almost 20 million cases, and around 1.3 million of these have been in Karnataka itself. The second wave, which started out at the end of February, has been particularly severe on all of us and very punishing, if I could say. Reasons for which have been put as multiple mutations that the virus must have gone through, to the complacency that seems to have set in amongst our people, which made all of us let our guard down in one way or the other. The entire country is reeling under the onslaught of this virus, and Karnataka seems to be no exception at all. In fact, it's one of the biggest hotspots that is emerging as one of the biggest hotspots. Bangalore is one of the biggest hotspots. According to official figures by the government, yesterday's figures stood at 47,563 cases in a day for Karnataka, out of which almost 21,500 have been reported in Bangalore itself. It's a huge number. So understandably, because of these numbers, all our healthcare workers and setups have been stretched, like I said, and everybody in the healthcare sector, starting from support staff to the doctors, have been working round the clock to help. And to say that they've been overworked would be a very big understatement. In these times, so all of us should actually do our bit to help our doctor colleagues in any way possible, to help them in any way possible. With this in mind, the NMO unit of my college, Dayanand Sagar College of Dental Sciences, under our principal, Dr. Hemant, with Sri Dayanandji's help, started initiative to support doctors by introducing teletriaging that could be of great help to patients who just require initial consultation, which can be done at home. It would also help taking a lot of burden off our already overworked doctors. With this in mind, we put together a team of very eminent and efficient medical doctors, all who are in the forefront of our state's fight against COVID in their own fields and specialities. They will, in the due course of this session, guide all of us present here on how to talk, guide, reassure patients who require medical assistance of any kind related to COVID. With this in mind, I would take this opportunity to invite Sri Devanandji amongst us. Who he's a very ardent RSS Karyakarta. He served as a PRO also, and he's single-handedly and tirelessly been helping in setting up COVID care centers all across the city. And he has been very forthcoming to all of us and readily accepted to support us in all our ventures. So a very big thank you to Sri Devanandji for extending all the support that he could give. A very warm welcome also to you, sir. Thank you for all your support. Uh, Now, I would also take this opportunity to invite a couple of others who've joined us. Dr. Sanjay Subbaya, Dr. Akshay Shetty, uh, Dr. Hemant, uh, Dr. Satish, Dr. Nagesh, and Sri Jitenderji. All of these people who've been instrumental in one way or the other in setting up today's program. I welcome all one of you, every one of you, to this program, evening's program. I hope you find this very useful. Having said that, I would now call upon Dr. Mohan, Dr. Mohan J, who's a respiratory medicine specialist. He's assistant professor, Department of Pulmonary Medicine, Bangalore Medical College Research Center. He is also serving as a consultant pulmonologist, Brindavan Arian Hospital in Chamarajpet, Bangalore. He's been practicing respiratory medicine since the last 6 years in Bangalore, actively working in management of COVID-19 illnesses for the past 1 year in Victoria and Brindavan Arian Hospital. Dr. Mohan J, please feel free to take over and guide us through this session and start the session for us, sir. Dr. Mohan, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Hemant sir and Dr. Nagesh sir for giving this opportunity, and also for Dr. Krishna sir and Dr. Pravina ma'am for organizing this CME. And I'll be just going through few slides, which will cover majority of the issues with managing the mild cases. Later, we can have a discussion like in a question and answer session. So we all know, as sir has introduced, the numbers are continuously increasing day by day. This is the global scenario, and presently the India is at this level. And the main thing is what we should see is observe is, so with this total of active cases of 3 million plus, so the only less than 5% people are in serious and critical situation. So we should try to not to panic as soon as we become positive and to stay calm. Okay, so these statistics, like of all the countries, if you can observe US, India, Brazil, the serious and critical cases are really less than 5% if you compare with the whole active cases. And this is the scenario with India present. And presently we are here, and in the beginning, in the last year, we were here in mid of August and September. So, but the peak of this year is too much to handle. So I think that is the reason why we are all here to help each other in managing the cases. So few basic definitions to just brush up your past, ILI is defined as one with acute respiratory infection with fever more than 38 degrees Celsius or 100.4 degree Fahrenheit, along with cough with onset within last 10 days. SARI is defined as one with acute respiratory infection with fever more than 38, cough with onset within 10 days, last 10 days, and requiring hospitalization. Respiratory failure represents the failure of the lung to maintain adequate gas exchange, characterized by ABG abnormalities like PaO2 of less than 60 millimeter of mercury with or without hypercarbia, that is more than PaCO2 more than 46. So at the outset, we have to, whenever we get a call or whenever we are seeing a case, we have to try to do the triaging, that is to listen to the history and with the help of pulse oximetry and counting the respiratory rate, we have to categorize the patients as mild, moderate, and severe disease. The mild disease, as you know, ILI cases without shortness of breath or hypoxia, which require home isolation. Moderate disease is the one with respiratory rate of more than 24 per minute and saturation less than or equal to 93% in room air, so which require admission. And severe cases are those one with respiratory rate more than 30 and saturation of less than 90% in room air, which may require HDU or ICU facility for further management. So this is the latest point of care guidelines for the management of COVID-19 released by Government of Karnataka, prepared by our Dr. Shashi Bhushan sir, HOD, BMCRA, Pulmonary Medicine. So, once the patient becomes symptomatic and he gets tested, so depending upon his symptoms, the majority of the patients may require home isolation or home care. So the person shall be clinically assigned as asymptomatic or mild case through telephonic triage or by the health staff or physician. Such cases should have the requisite facility at their residence for self-isolation and also for quarantining the family contacts. A caregiver should be available to provide care on a 24/7 basis. A regular communication link between the caregiver and the hospital is a prerequisite for the entire duration of home isolation and home care. The person shall agree to monitor his or her health and regularly inform their health status to the telemonitoring team or the physician or family doctor for further follow-up of the surveillance teams. Home isolation or home care shall not be applicable for pregnant women 2 weeks before the expected date of delivery. And the patient can be asymptomatic or they can have just mild symptoms of dry cough, fever, anosmia, myalgia, or diarrhea. Even loss of taste and smell is very common nowadays. And of late, we are seeing the tiredness is the most common symptom first to start with, which many people neglect, and they only become serious or try to contact any health hospital or the doctor only when they develop fever or cough. So the people try to neglect tiredness as a common. They won't consider it as a symptom at all. But we should be careful even with the tiredness of late. And investigations suggested for asymptomatic and mild cases are like CBC. Baseline investigations are CBC, LFT, RFT, random blood sugar, chest X-ray if possible, and CRP. We can add D-dimer if there are any high-risk category patients, and SpO2 monitoring like to be done every 6 hourly, and 6-minute walk test or 3-minute walk test. So this is a concept which has been followed since the last 1 year for to predict early deterioration of in the clinical condition. So 6-minute walk test is nothing but patient. Actually, ideally, what we do for 6-minute walk test is to have a 30 feet stretch to walk, but it's not possible at home. So within the room or within the hall, we should ask the patient to walk for 6 minutes. If the patients are elderly, at least for 3 minutes, and to check for the saturation. So it's desaturation, that is drop in saturation of more than or equal to 4% is considered significant, which may give us an early sign that the patient may progress from mild to moderate. And according to the latest guidelines, even the AIIMS New Delhi has recommended tablet ivermectin 12 milligram OD for 3 to 5 days, and favipiravir has got mixed opinion from the treating physicians. Few have found benefit and few have not. To be given 1800 mg BD on day 1, followed by 800 mg BD for 6 days, along with immune boosters like vitamin C and zinc. The patient has to monitor his symptom, body temperature, and to maintain adequate hydration, and to measure the blood pressure twice a day and perform 6-minute walk test every day. So if these patients develop, if the above patient develops any following symptoms like shortness of breath or breathlessness, or the patient has got persistent tachycardia along with palpitations or saturation dropping below 94%, or there is any asset, I already told you, there is drop in saturation of more than 4% while doing 6-minute walk test or 3-minute walk test. And if there is any neutrophil infiltrate ratio of more than 3.5, and any worsening of any previously developed symptoms like persistent fever from 100 is going to 103, 101, 102, like that, then we need to reassess and to try to shift them to any DCHC, that is dedicated COVID health center and or hospital. So all opting for the home isolation patients, they should have pulse oximeter and BP apparatus at the home. Pulse oximeter is a must instrument nowadays. Patient whose symptoms increase within the next 12 to 24 hours after the teletriaging needs to be shifted immediately to HCCC or DCHC depending upon the situation. The criteria for them to have within a house is a separate well-ventilated room with a separate toilet for the person in isolation or home care. The person shall stay in the identified room and away from other persons at all times. So sometimes the persons, the patients may not have the adequate facility at home, and they may opt for a COVID care center for the management. So again, the investigations are similar to for the home isolation patients: CBC, LFT, RFT, RBS, chest X-ray, CRP, monitoring of SpO2 6 hourly, 6-minute walk test or 3-minute walk test, and if they find any desaturation of more than 4% on 6-minute walk test, it is an indication, early indication for us to ask them to shift for any nearby hospital. And management wise, again same, ivermectin 12 milligram OD for 3 to 5 days, favipiravir initially starting with 1800 BD and followed by 800 mg BD for next 6 days, followed by vitamin C and zinc. Rest are all same. They should monitor symptom, body temperature, oxygen saturation, take adequate hydration, monitor the BP twice a day, and perform 6-minute walk test. And we need to, whenever we do a tele-counseling or tele-triaging, we need to counsel the patient and also the family members not to panic and to just stick to our advice and to report immediately whenever they have any doubt, and to our work is more of a reassurance. We have to reassure them that it will be fine. Okay. And as I already told you, pulse oximeter is a must. Again, if these patients in triple C, they become like worse, like if there is any shortness of breath or there is tachycardia, saturation less than 94%, we have to shift them for the DCHC or DCH. And it is preferable to have triple Cs, at least with 50% of the beds in triple Cs should have oxygen supply, so that till the patient gets a bed in a DCHC or DCH, they should be managed in the triple C. So the patients who are in triple C will stand discharged or released from home isolation after 10 days of symptom onset. The patient has mild symptom, the day one of symptom to be counted. Sometimes the patient may be asymptomatic. He may be a primary contact of a positive patient. The date of sampling to be taken as day one. And they should not have any fever for the previous 3 consecutive days. And they should be maintaining saturation of 94 and above in room air. So thereafter, the patient shall be advised to isolate at home or self-monitor their health for further 7 days. So 10 days plus 7 days. So only after 7 days, they can come out of the isolation. And there is no need for any COVID test, whatever like RT-PCR, rapid or CPNet or TrueNet, any kind of testing after the period of home isolation is over. So few add-ons to the present guidelines from Government of Karnataka is from the AIIMS, which again they recommend ivermectin. If the fever is not controlled with maximum dose of paracetamol, that is 650 mg QID, we may consider using NSAID-like tablet naproxen 250 mg PD, and inhalational budesonide. Like inhalation budesonide, like given like along with spacer 800 microgram PD for 5 to 7 days have found better with the improvement with especially with the cough and fever. So to be started if the symptoms is persistent beyond 5 days of the disease onset. And most important point is the systemic steroids. It's not indicated in mild disease. Okay, but however, it may be considered in cases with high grade fever and worsening cough beyond 7 days only in consultation with a treating physician for a duration of 3 to 5 days. The dexamethasone is 0.1 to 0.2 milligram per kg OD dose, and tablet methylpred 0.5 to 1 milligram kg in 2 divided dose. So only that is why the date of onset of symptom is very crucial. So we need to count the date of onset of symptom, and if the patient has crossed 7 days from date of onset of symptom, and if the person is having persistent fever and persistent cough, only then we need to advise for any oral steroids and not to start early before he has touched the 7-day duration. So the reason for this is it has been very beautifully explained by Dr. Paul Maury as a MAD plus protocol. So if you can observe in this chart, like this is the incubation period. For example, like approximately 4 to 5 days is the incubation period for the virus. If you count this one as a day 1 of the symptom onset, so from here till almost 6 to 7 days, there is the symptomatic period and the viral replication period. So this is the time where we need to have antiviral treatments like ivermectin, or in late stages, which we may start even remdesivir, not advised for the mild cases. But if the inflammatory part will start only after the 6 to 7 days of the symptom onset. So the anti-inflammatory will come into action only after the 7 days. So if we start these steroids very too early in the viral replication phase without giving any antivirals, we are helping the virus to multiply and progress the disease to moderate to severe form. So we should be very careful before starting any type of anti-inflammatory medications like steroids. So the date of onset of symptom is very, very crucial. So we need to know who are the high-risk patients. That is very much important, because these high-risk patients tend to progress or deteriorate very rapidly if you compare with the other normal population. So more than 60 years, patients with IHD, diabetes, hypertension, any pre-existing lung disease like COPD, asthma, or post-TB sequelae, or even ILD, interstitial lung disease, or a CKD patient, or a chronic liver disease patient, patients who are already on immunosuppression for malignancy or on HIV treatment, And if you can observe obesity, it is actually very, very important. So obesity has become as a very, very, very high risk in managing moderate to severe cases when we are doing providing oxygenation or providing ventilation. So obesity is a very, very risky risk factor. And as I already told you, saturation less than 94%, tachycardia, tachypnea more than 30, systolic blood pressure less than 90, and altered sensorium. And lab values of CRP more than 100, serum ferritin more than 300, LDH more than 450, and D-dimer more than 1000 nanograms. And this D-dimer, as we know, it's a non-specific indicator. So there are, like, for example, if the patient is having, like, recently had a any road traffic accident, anything like that, or if the patient is a pregnant, she is a pregnant, so D-dimer may be higher before they may get COVID. So it should be addressed with proper history, as it is a non-specific marker. So coming to teletriaging as such, as we are concentrating more on that, so the history remains the mystery, because everyone knows the patient tend to reduce this whenever we ask for a history. The patient tend to reduce the severity of symptoms, or to tell us and to try to modify the history, thinking that they may be admitted, they may be given more medications or like that. So that's the method, like what we are seeing more of the patient. So history is very crucial, because for example, the patient may be having a fever history more than 7 days back, but after 3-4 days he has taken some medications and he's having a second fever spike at the day 8 or day 9. He may come to you on day 10 and he may tell he is having fever only for the last 2 days. So we think that he has developed symptom only since the last 2-3 days, and we may just put him on the mild cases treatment. So, but we need to keep repeatedly ask the patient we should ask a leading question: did he have any symptom 1 year before, 1 week back or 5 days back, or were any positive patient at home? And then the patients will start telling you that, yeah, I had fever 4-5 days back. And then we have to again change the day of onset of symptom. It will be almost like a day 8 and day 9. And saturation may be hitting like just below 94, 93. So he'll be a moderate case, not a mild case. So history is very important. So people tend to confuse us, but we should be very much, you should have very much clarity. So that day of onset of illness is the key. And counseling is again the key thing, because as soon as we hear the patient is having 94, 93 saturation, we should not put them again in a panic, using some strong words that he is very sick, or should calm them down. We should explain what is the next procedure, and we should tell them, give them reassurance that he will be taken care well, he will recover, and we have to shift him to the hospital. Okay, then we should keep repeatedly telling them the important instructions, like to sleep on their stomach for prone ventilation, and to monitor the SpO2 regularly 6 hourly. And every patient will ask you about the dietary advice. So what should I take, what not should I take, all those things. For the diabetic and hypertensive patients, with the dietary advice remains the same. And Ministry of Ayush has given some guidelines regarding supplementation of immune boosters, which we can advise for the patients. I will stop my session here, and I'll take the questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. We now have with us Dr. Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar sir has been professor and head of intensive care, and more importantly, he has been with us for training doctors for this teletriaging a lot of times. In fact, he gave a very, very useful and helpful talk the last time around we had this program for doctors. So I'm sure the doctors who are in attendance today will also find Dr. Chandrasekhar's talk very, very relevant and useful. So having said that, I would now call upon Dr. Chandrasekhar to take over and address the gathering. Dr. Chandrasekhar, all yours, sir.
So I think you're on mute.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now
Yes,
you're
sir.
audible.
Yes,
After
sir.
Dr. Mohan's talk, I think my life is made easy, though I may not agree with the whole thing and the guidelines that the government has put up. The guidelines have been put up probably because of the wide spectrum of reach that it has to produce and the availability of drugs. So some areas I may differ with Dr. Mohan, but by and large with what he says, I would agree. Only some small disagreements on the drugs. I will put forward the evidence and leave it to the people to decide. So as we all know, COVID affects the lung. Cursor is not moving. My cursor is not moving. Just give me a second. Some
You
issue.
can exit and again relaunch it, sir.
Huh?
You can exit it and again relaunch it. Yeah.
Yeah. That should do. Yeah. So the initial issue is with the virus attacking the lung, it damages the lung and produces the lung damage leading to pneumonia. When the cells, the white cells start breaking down or communicate by producing a lot of interleukins, we go into what we call it as a kind of a immune storm. If mostly the immune system is stimulated to control the infection. In most of the cases, say about 90% of the cases, as Dr. Mohan said, the immune system works properly. It just stops by killing the virus, doesn't affect the body. The patients who get sick are the patients when the immune system misfires and start attacking the patient's other organs and causing the cytokine storm. So this is what we are trying to prevent with the use of steroids. There has been robust evidence, especially of dexamethasone being 6 milligrams given for 10 days, or alternatively, if somebody is sick and can't take it orally, methylprednisolone of 1 milligram per kg. The other problem with this virus is it starts penetrating through the lung, goes and attacks the vascular system, causing endotheliopathy, vascular damage, and clot formation. So there are two pathologies here. One is a pneumonia, and second one is blood clotting. So this can be prevented with anticoagulants. So these are the two drugs that probably are required if there is a when the immune system dysfunctions or the pneumonia goes out of hand. As Dr. Mohan said, I would concur that in the first 7 to 8 days, when the viral replication phase, steroids have to be avoided. Beyond 6 to 7 days or the end of the first week of symptomatology, if the patient starts showing a desaturation or increase in symptoms, that is when steroids have to set in with probably anticoagulants. I would not concur with everybody, a mild case, a 20-year-old guy sitting at home with no symptoms going and getting a blood test. It is a simple deduction that SpO2 tends to parallel the lung involvement and cytokine storm. If your SpO2 is more than 96, this guy doesn't require any investigations to be done, especially with so many cases. Sending these patients out for getting blood tests or asking them to organize, as I've been monitoring patients at home, is not going to be of any use. It is very, very simple deduction that SpO2 trend parallels the lung involvement. You can escalate or de-escalate the treatment looking at your saturation. And there is no additional information you are going to go and get it by putting getting HRCT or a X-ray or the alarm markers or the blood tests that are frequently done. To make it more clear to you, if some patient on day 1 has 96, on day 2 has 93, day 3 has 90, 2 and on day 6 or 5 as less than 90, there is no need to do. It is obvious that the lung would have gone to a stage where there is a severe consolidation. So by additionally looking at or trying to send patients out and getting tests are not to be advised because of the stress on the system, because we are running where the health infrastructure is trying to get torn at the seams. So when somebody has a saturation of 89, 96 or 98, 99, young guy, or even a 50-year-old guy, 60-year-old guy, 80-year-old guy has no symptoms, what is the fun in going and getting an investigation? So my contention is always follow the trends of SpO2. Your SpO2 trends parallel the disease, parallel the lung involvement. If the SpO2s are good, there is no need to get any investigations, whatever the age, whatever the comorbidities. If the lung is involved, if your alarm markers are going haywire, if the immune system is misfiring, your SpO2 will come down. So you can monitor SpO2 and there is no need to get any kind of investigations for mild cases in home monitoring. So treatment escalation and de-escalation should parallel SpO2 trends. Clinical signs like fever, cough, fatigue, altered mentation, difficulty in breathing, respiratory rate can add up. If somebody is desaturating with signs of fever, increased cough, altered mentation, respiratory rate goes up, then you know whether you do the investigations or not, you can escalate the therapy and start managing the patient. If the saturations go less than 93, to most of the patients, we would suggest them to go to a COVID care center or to a hospital. But there has been a lot of patients whom we are trying to manage with up till 90 at home because there are no availability of beds, and most of them, if the trend is happening over a period of time, tend to stabilize if the saturations are somewhere 90 or more than 90. I'll show you some examples how to make a decision. So my contention is patient on SpO2 trends parallel lung involvement. So when the SpO2 is more than 96, there is no need to do any testing. You can just generally manage the patient at home. And the rate of decline is important. For example, a guy from 96 goes to 90 in a day or two. This is a rapid deterioration. These are the patients who are going to go sick because the downward trend of the disease process is there. So this is the patients who generally have to be referred to the hospital on a priority basis. If the trend is declining from 96 to say about 92 on 8th day, 9th day, probably these guys can be still held on to the home management. I am putting a little of margin there because of the non-availability of the beds. I would definitely advise everybody to go and get a bed with a saturation of less than 92 or 91. But because of the non-availability, always look at the rate of decline. Rate of decline is a very important sign. If the decline occurs very fast, probably the patient requires to go to the hospital. If it occurs gradually and stays very stable and patient is clinically comfortable, not having tachypnea, not having exaggerated cough, not having fever, and he says he doesn't have any difficulty in breathing, as Dr. Mohan said, can advise a 6-minute walk, and on a 6-minute walk, there is no decrease from 91. Then probably that patients can be still held at home.
Chandrasekhar sir.
Yes.
Sir, Dr. Praveena here.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have our Honorable MP Shri Tejasvi Surya on the call.
Yeah.
The sir would like to have a brief talk with the participants and the panelists.
Yeah, please.
Just immediately get back to you. Apologies for interrupting.
No problem.
Tejasvi sir, you can hear me?
Namaste. Yes, madam, I can.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think the screen sharing is still on. If we can.
Yeah. I'll cut it, sir.
Yeah, it is on.
I just take 5 minutes and nothing more.
So stop share. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes. Yelrugu namaskara. Namaste to everybody. Very good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I want to thank the volunteers of NMO, the doctors associated with NMO, and all of you who have been supporting the BJYM Doctors Helpline. The BJYM Doctors Helpline, in the last 15 days after our launch, has got more than 28,000 phone calls from all over India. What is the most heartening thing is that when we look at the map from where we have got calls from Andaman Nicobar, we have got calls from Kashmir, we have got calls from Manipur, we have got calls from all across the country. Just like how the attending doctors are also a part from all parts of the country. So truly, this has been an initiative which has, in every sense, symbolizes how India has come, together, how India has come as one to address this very important challenge of COVID-19. There were a lot of issues that were there. Some issues have been sorted out. Streamlining of the process, ensuring that only valid calls come straight to doctors is one of the key tasks that our backend team has done. Now, there's only one thing that I request all of you. What we need is highly motivated doctors. There's nothing that can compensate that. So till now, all of you have been, we have, no words to thank you for the kind of dedication with which all of you have answered calls, given consultations to people. When people call us back and give reviews about the doctor consultation, it fills our heart with joy that a small initiative like the one that we started is making so big impact in their lives. This is not possible without your dedication. I have two requests to make from all of you. If you can give a little more hours every day than what you're already giving, you will be able to help more patients. Second, if we can get more doctors enrolled on the platform, we can help more people. These are the only two requests that I have from you. Starting tomorrow, all important chief ministers of many states where the BJP is in power will start making videos of publicizing the BJYM helpline. This is going to give a lot of publicity to the helpline, which means that we must have that much of back-end doctors ready to cater to the demand and complete the consultations effectively. I have a lot of trust on all of you. NMO and the associated doctors have always stood up to the cause of the country whenever the country has requested them to do so, whenever the people of the country have needed them. With those words, I want to thank Praveena ji. I want to thank Dr. Chandrasekhar. I want to request all doctors who are part of this initiative to give it your best. We are all here. If there's anything that I can do from my end to support all of you in this initiative, we are here. I can see Swami Bilahalli raising his hand to ask a question. Please do so, and I will be more than happy to answer your question. And then we can all continue with the very important presentation that Dr. Chandrasekhar was giving all of us, which I very interrupted in the middle. So sorry, doctor.
No problem, sir.
Swami.
Sorry. Namaskara, Tejasvi Surya.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, I'm calling from UK.
Sir.
Nammalli ಒಂದು 30 ಜನ ವಾಲಂಟಿಯರ್ಸ್ ಇದೀವಿ. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅನಸ್ಥೆಟಿಸ್ಟ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ED ಕನ್ಸಲ್ಟೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ನರ್ಸ್ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿಸ್ಟ್, ಅಡ್ವಾನ್ಸ್ ನರ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟಿಷನರ್ಸ್ ಇವರೆಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. So what we want is a triage system where we can assess the patient who we can manage from remotely from home itself. But one of the problems that we are facing is we are unable to prescribe any medications from here. That is one thing. And second thing is, if the patients are quite deteriorating, we need a system in place where we can escalate them to the hospital directly instead of having to go through another medical person wasting their time.
Sir, we are actually improving the platform to that. There are some important restrictions and policy guidelines of the teleconsultation platform that we have to adhere to. In a week or so, this new platform with these features of making prescriptions, etc., will also be ready. Till then, please bear with us. The most important challenge for us is this. Every day, there are about 150 to 200 consultations that are carried forward for the next day. So unless people get the teleconsultation call on the same day, the efficiency of the platform will be hit. So my request to you is to increase the number of hours that you can volunteer, to increase the number of doctors that you can get on the platform. This is going to really help the platform. So
we not only have a doctors, we have a nurse specialists who have been successfully running this program from UK. So what we want to request is we need a platform for nurses where we can triage the patient, offload some of the doctor's duties, so they don't need to get involved in every single patient. We have a standard way of
so
advising
Swamiji,
patients.
you kindly discuss this with Praveena ji. I will, have to, attend to another important video conference call on oxygen concentrators. There's some stuck in China, which we need to bring it here. So I take leave of all of you. My only humble request is that you continue the service that you are giving to the country. Increase the number of hours that you can on consultation. Increase the number of doctors that we have on the platform. Thank once again the backend volunteers, the ops managers, and everybody who's contributing to ensure that the BJYM Doctors Helpline remains a very, very strong and robust mechanism for teleconsultation for patients who reach out to us. Namaste. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Chandrasekhar sir, sorry for the interruption.
No
Over
problem,
to you.
no problem.
Over to you. Yeah.
As I've said, this is a 65-year-old guy, COVID with diabetes, hypertension. As you would see here, from day 1 to day 8, his saturations are 90. After a 6-minute walk, if this guy is still holding at a saturation of 90, possibly this guy has no fever, cough, fatigue, alternate mentation, no difficulty in breathing, respiratory rate is just 21. He says he's comfortable. I think this guy can be managed at home. This I have pushed the goalpost a bit to a higher side onto the edge is because of the non-availability of the beds. So what I want to underscore here is, it is not the number you look at. You always look at the rate of decline of the SpO2 and how stable it is. And if on a 3-minute or a 6-minute walk test, if he's not dropping the saturation, clinically comfortable, probably can hold the patient at home. And when saturation is dropping anything less than 93, not able to get a bed, I would suggest all of you to add up a steroid and anticoagulant. I'll tell what are the drugs that commonly are being prescribed. But my advice is, whatever the primary therapy is, but there should not be any dispute that when the saturation start dropping and the patient is probably around the edge of the first week, the addition of steroids and anticoagulants could be life-saving. As I was told, this is based on good, robust evidence and also on the understanding of the pathology of the disease. See, now you see a guy who's 25 years old and suddenly on day 2 his saturation drops from 95 to 90. I think this is the guy who should not be at home. So you cannot apply the same numbers or yardsticks like a big framework because every patient is different. So my contention is always look at the drop in saturation, clinical condition. It is nothing much except the symptoms, how fast he is breathing. Does he complain of any difficulty in breathing? Is he feeling dizzy or is he feeling drowsy, not comfortable? These are the signs with a desaturation that should alert you for a earlier hospitalization or to a shift to a COVID care center. See, this is how commonly we get into being asked, 55-year-old diabetic male has cough and fever. Friend's uncle, what is your advice? And do we do a RT-PCR and a RAT test now? Probably, if it is available. But now the guidelines have been modified. You don't require to have a positive PCR to be admitted to hospitals. Symptomatology and especially loss of smell and taste is almost a certain sign that the patient has COVID. The reason why that has been done is because the RT-PCR sometimes takes 2-3 days and the patients tend to get sick in that phase. So now the state guidelines have been modified. You don't require to have a positive PCR, only symptomatology is enough for a hospital admission as COVID. So the lifeline for any patient would be a pulse oximeter. And as I've said, you should tell the patient how to put a pulse oximeter and to measure it for a minute and then take a call. And the 3-minute and 6-minute walk tests are very good. You can ask them to do it every once a day so that we know whether it is deteriorating or not. And always mind the nail polish. Nail polish can give false results. Most of the patients who are young and not having any symptoms, not even fever, there is no point in prescribing antiviral and ivermectin and drugs like that, because even those drugs are going to get difficult to find. And most of them, as I've seen over a period of both the first and second waves, that can be managed with a simple antipyretic, a Dolo, if not responding, a Brufen of 400 mg or a Naproxen 200 mg twice daily would be enough. As Dr. Mohan has said, nutrition is very important. There is absolutely no contraindication to eat non-vegetarian food, and a fluid intake of around 1 to 1.5 liters would be advisable. And all patients can be encouraged to go in for a awake proning, about 3 hours per session, 2 to 3 times a day, or as much as they tolerate. If they're not able to tolerate sleeping on the stomach, they can sleep on the sides, and also sitting posture sometimes is good for improving the oxygenation. Supportive care has been given, but if you actually look at, there is no great evidence for ivermectin, favipiravir and doxycycline. I've seen patients getting these many drugs. 25-year-old saturation is 99, 50-year-old saturation of 96, doxycycline, ivermectin, azithromycin, favipiravir, Medrol, aspirin and montelukast. It has become almost like this. We have stopped using sound scientific reasoning and evidence and replaced with drug cocktails based on my experience, or saying every doctor saying that my patient improved. So this doesn't augur well for the scientific community. There is guidelines that have been produced. My contention is most of the Indian and ICMR guidelines are based on the availability of drugs rather than evidence-based. If you look at the ivermectin, the dose of ivermectin which can kill the virus is 100 times more of what we are using of 1.2 milligrams or 12 milligrams what we use. It has to be 100 times more. So if you look at most of the international guidelines, there is absolutely no mention of favipiravir and ivermectin, but we still tend to give, at least kindly give it to patients who have a saturation less than 96, around 94, 95, not to a 25-year-old with no symptoms, absolutely no symptoms. 50-year-old guy, absolutely twice, both the vaccines done, completely no symptoms, got tested because some son or a wife got tested, but absolutely no symptoms. There is no need to get the investigations or put so many drugs, because most of the drugs don't have evidence. Only 2 drugs that can alter or having some evidence would be a blood thinner or an anticoagulant and a steroid. As I've said, SpO2 trends parallel the lung involvement. My advice is, if the patient starts dropping saturations on the 5th, 6th, 7th day, starts becoming sick, add dexamethasone 6 milligrams once daily, or a Solumedrol 32 milligrams once or twice daily is also acceptable. And these are the blood thinners we generally prescribe. Aspirin of 150 milligrams, Apexaban, which is a factor 10 inhibitor, which is 2.5 milligrams twice daily, and dabigatran, which is a direct thrombin inhibitor, 150 milligrams once or twice daily can be prescribed. So these are the two drugs at home. Many sick patients not able to get bed or stable can really make a difference. These are the two drugs that has to be added up. Kindly remember these drugs. All the slides I have given it to the organizers, and it can be given to all the delegates. So as Dr. Mohan has already said, the sicker patients, and he has already said what are the criteria to shift the patient, and I have said that it need not be very rigid because of the non-availability of the beds till 90 with a gradual decrease, and on a 6-minute walk, if somebody is able to hold saturation, kindly allow them to be at home, because by putting 80-year-old, 90-year-old on hospital beds, we are denying beds to lot of young patients. 23-year-old, 30, 40-year-old people are dying. So be very cognizant to the fact that always prioritize the younger patients and patients who can be salvaged. There is no fun in admitting a patient with 40 saturation or a patient who has had a cardiac arrest, because it's a pandemic. All of us have to be triaging to save patients who are salvageable and younger. So if you look at the treatment that is available as an oxygen therapy would be in a COVID care center, nasal prongs, nasal mask, and non-rebreathing. But most of the COVID care centers are operating with oxygen concentrators with a 5-liter flow. So on a 5-liter flow, I would advise to use most of the times an oxygen mask, where we can up till roughly give to about 50 to 60% of FiO2, and any saturation of less than 88 in a COVID care center warrants a shifting to the ICU or to a hospital which has better facility. And always remember this: correlate your SpO2 to your FiO2 delivered, and 1 liter of oxygen adds 4% of FiO2 above 21%. So this is something all of us have to remember. If somebody says your oxygen saturation is 70, 80, you should, the first thing in a COVID care center or at home, you should ask, are you on a concentrator? Are you on an oxygen cylinder? If on an oxygen concentrator or on a cylinder, if somebody is saturating less than 88, probably that patient has to go to a hospital setting. And the one more advice you can do is to see the saturation after the patient prones himself or sleeps on the stomach. Sometimes we see an excellent increase in the oxygenation. Such patients, when the oxygenation really shoots up to 95, 96, probably can be left at home or in the COVID care centers. So just to add up, because a lot of patients, relatives keep asking you all that what are the drug options that we have. Now I have said that all hospitalized patients on oxygen should be on steroid and a blood thinner. On a hospital setting, we usually give a low molecular weight heparin or a heparin. Once we exhaust with these two drugs, there are only 2 more drugs that we can play around. One is remdesivir, and the other one is immunosuppressants, either tocilizumab or baricitinib. These are the only 2 drugs we have at the present moment in our armamentarium. After the 2 definitive drugs that we had, dexamethasone and methylprednisolone and enoxaparin or heparin. In a COVID care center, you can go with oral blood thinners, oral anticoagulants also. There is no need to put a IV line. All the drugs can be oral. In a center that you are planning to run, it can be oral dexamethasone, oral methylprednisolone, oral aspirin, oral apixaban, and oral dabigatran. Then if the patient doesn't do well and the oxygen starts dipping, on proning also oxygen starts dipping, less than 85, definitely this patient has to go to the hospital setting. I would say anything less than 88 on oxygen, kindly don't keep such patients in the COVID care centers. So just in case somebody is interested to know, after you send, we have only 3 things to do. One, either put HFNC or NIV or intubate and put a ventilator. So as the patient becomes more and more sicker, So it goes from HFNC or then to NIV and on to a ventilator. So a lot of your friends and relatives may be asking you that whenever they say saturations are low, you should kindly ask on what support in the hospital. Is he on oxygen still, or is he on HFNC, NIV or ventilator? And as you can see, as they go above the ladder, the more the sicker the patient would be. So to conclude, I would say, even all of us are vaccinated. Remember this, we will get infected, not that, and we will infect others. So hand washing, face and social distancing have to be well maintained. I would say in India, more patients have died due to inadequate escalation of infrastructure rather than treatment failure. So a training like this probably is going to bridge the inadequate escalation, and our MP has been in the forefront leading this. Hope this all leads to saving a lot more lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. That was really the last part that you spoke about, where we still have to protect ourselves and others from the pandemic, though we are vaccinated, is a really true message. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Sudhendra HS. Dr. Surendra HS is MBBS, MD, IDP, CCM. He has fellowship in pediatric critical care and consultant pediatric sorry. Just a second. So sir has done MBBS from JJMMC Davangere and MD from Hubli. He has critical care fellowship from KKCTH Chennai and 10 years of experience in pediatric critical care. Currently, sir has been managing COVID sick pediatric cases for the last 9 months. So Dr. Surendra HS, we would request you to address the gathering.
Hello. Hello. Yes, I'm not able to share the video slide.
I've stopped my sharing, sir. It will happen now. Hello.
Hello.
I have
1
stopped
minute.
my screen. Share, sir. You try now, sir. It will happen now.
Yeah, I'm trying, sir.
Yeah.
Hello. I'm audible?
Yeah, it's visible and you're audible. Please continue.
Yes. Thank you for the organizers to give this opportunity to discuss about COVID-19. Almost all the points are discussed by Dr. Chandrasekhar and Dr. Mohan, and little modification. So I won't go very in detail. I would like to discuss about few things what we do in like neonates, infants or pediatric, and during pregnancy and lactating mother. So majority of the management during the pregnancy and lactation remains the same like how the adult COVID is managed. Only regarding to the like pediatric cases I will concentrate more on. So first in the COVID first wave of the COVID, we have not seen much cases of pediatric COVID. So very few cases I saw. But this second wave, almost if I test whatever, like 80% of our pediatric who comes apart from the vaccination, 80% are like pediatric COVID. If I test for like 10 patients, out of 10, 8 are coming positive.
Unmuted by mistake. 1 second.
Hello.
Go ahead,
I'm
sir. You
audible?
are audible.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So in this season, almost like it's my personal experience where at least in my hospital or clinic, where at least daily 10 pediatric cases are diagnosed. So who are coming with just cold without any family members travel, family member symptoms, they're coming positive. The child who is coming with just mild fever with the diarrhea, with parents' request, I have done COVID RT-PCR, they have come positive. Who are presented only with fever, they have come COVID positive. So any child, literally mild cold cough, they're almost 80% are COVID positive. You are just 1 day fever or mild or high grade, they're coming COVID positive. And any intestinal symptom, they're coming positive. So this episode, we are seeing more and more pediatric COVID. But the good thing is, in the last 1.5 to 2 months, except one pediatric, we have not admitted any pediatric cases. Most of them are mild. So most of them recovered at home isolation, home treatment. What is worrying for me, the last some of the Lancet experts are saying the COVID, like whatever we expected, third wave in the October, we are probably expecting more pediatric cases less than 18 years. The possible reasons being, one is vaccination for more than 18 years and starting up schools and whatever mutation. So India being like, we should be prepared for more and more pediatric beds, are more and more nurses and doctor intensivists prepared for this. We neglected like COVID wave 2. That's the, we are not well prepared for this. That's the reason like we are like shortage of remdesivir, shortage of oxygen, shortage of beds. So that's the reason we should be well prepared for the wave 3 also. So nobody can be sure that whether wave 3 comes or not. But according to expert, we should be well prepared in India with the medicines, beds, and more intensivists or doctors or nurses to be trained for pediatric cases come. So coming to the pediatric case management, so very simple and I will not take much time. If they have come positive, like in case of mild illness, so when do you call mild illness? If they are just sore throat, rhinorrhea or cough, no breathing difficulty. Just simple thing, home isolation, bed rest, adequate hydration, no further treatment. So any other medicines is not required except symptomatic like paracetamol. So like you need to monitor them regularly. Coming to the moderate illness, so that is moderate illness means along with fever, cough, mild fever without much severe illness. So such cases, like if they have like pneumonia or mild tachypnea with maintaining saturation, admit them. So again, the treatment for moderate cases of pneumonia in pediatric is like adequate hydration, adequate paracetamol. If the saturation drops below 94, start oxygen. So if SOS required antibiotic coverage, if you're suspecting bacterial, and whatever zinc and vitamin C can be given. But other like as of now, for such cases, there is no recommendation for remdesivir, no recommendation for steroid, no azithromycin, no doxy, no ivermectin. Coming to the severe illness, when do you call, like in coming to the lung part, if they are like developed ARDS, or if they are sepsis or septic shock, or myocardial involvement, or multi-organ involvement. Like if the saturation less than 90, or there is tachypnea, grunting, subcostal retraction, if they have seizures or lethargy. In the first wave, my first diagnosis of COVID in June, patient came with 1 day fever, status epilepticus. So during that time in India, June, there were no much cases. So any part of protocol we sent, that's how the child turned out to be COVID. So managed accordingly, went home well. So such severe case of COVID-19, admit them basically to ICU. So here the investigation we need to do is CBC, CRP, LFT, RFT, LDH, and D-dimer, whatever inflammatory markers. So if the saturation is low, start them with the oxygen. If workup breathing is high, like how we manage for adult, like HHFNC is very excellent and very tolerable for pediatric cases. We use it even for preterm, even term or whatever neonatal baby, and HHFNC is excellent. tolerance of NIV in less than 6 years is very difficult. So our mainstay of like oxygen delivery either through nasal or wearing mask and NRM also for small kids are very difficult. So HFCMC decrease the work of breathing and decrease the intubation. So coming to the ARDS management, it is like any adult lung protective strategy, like low total volume, high PEEP. Like we, if they are severe ARDS, we generally intubate, sedate them. Like lung protective strategy with low tidal volume, that is like 4 to 5 ml per kg, optimal PEEP, and like accept the high CO2 with normal pH is there, and good hydration, and better to keep them in like negative balance, good sedation. Coming to the shock management, appropriate IV fluid, boluses, if there is a cardiac involvement, inotrope management. In nowadays, we are seeing more of like we had a case presented like 3 days back, 7-year child with high grade fever, conjunctival congestion, and rash. And on investigation, CBC normal, CRP is more like 150, ESR is high, platelet is 1.6. Like D-dimer and ferritin are like higher side. So this child RT-PCR negative, rapid antigen test is negative, but COVID IgG antibodies are positive. This is a complication of post-COVID. We call it as a MISC, that is multi-system inflammatory syndrome of children secondary to COVID. This child, we started with like high inflammatory markers. So started with like that didn't require. This child started with low dose of MPS, like 1 to 2 mg per kg. Started IVIG. So it's a post-COVID causing like Kawasaki-like illness. The child is fitting the criteria of Kawasaki. In the recent, this one, in the abroad particularly, COVID has increased the incidence of Kawasaki. So any child present with high-grade fever, high CRP, rash, atypical presentation of COVID. So early IVIG installation is very important before the coronary involvement. So coming to the steroid, we generally give like MPS low dose. They are very like severe illness, like 1 to 2 mg per kg. We give. What about remdesivir? There are no clinical trial in pediatric. What is currently advised is more than 12 years, more than 40 kg, the dosage of like adult, like 200 mg start, 100 mg per next 4 days. Really, if they're very sick, initial phase, like what Dr. Chandrasekhar and Dr. Mohan told, initial viremia phase, you can try the remdesivir. Like benefit of doubt, it decreases the hospital stay. The mortality benefit may not be there, but decreases the symptom. You can from 3.5 to 40 kg, you can like give 5 mg per kg on day 1, then 2.5 mg per kg. So till now, like I've seen more than 500 cases in the last 2 months. So like none of them is required remdesivir injection. So most of them, what I have seen is like in the general, this one, if you take across the world, 80% of the pediatric cases are mild form. Another like 18% are like requiring mild illness or mild to moderate requiring admission, like particularly in Western countries. In Bangalore, we have not seen much pediatric cases getting admitted. Only 2% is the incidence where requiring hospitalization. So currently, we are not seeing very sick cases, but post-COVID, we are seeing few cases of PIMS or MISC. So current recommendation for pediatric is no need to be panic, like isolate the kids. And one more thing I have noticed in last 2 months is, before anybody in the family members are getting the symptoms, the pediatric cases are like they are manifesting with cold and cough. I had a recent bad experience with me, was like one patient, 4.5 years. I have followed up this child since birth, like delivered in our hospital, followed up. They came to me with like just cold cough. I advised this a pandemic, we'll do the COVID test. Parents refused. They are like government official only. They refused to get the COVID. After 2 days, child continued to have cold, cough, tiredness. They came to me. I said, we'll do RT-PCR. After 2 days of preservation, they got the COVID test done. It came positive. Then I advised everybody in the family, get COVID test done. In case any problem, so it can be treated early. So like they said, sir, we will be in like no symptoms. We will be in isolation. Will not go ahead for the COVID test. So after 7 days, the father got high-grade fever, cough, admitted in a hospital, rapidly started deteriorating in the next 3 days. Okay, like requiring high oxygen requirement, shock, and requiring IFI out of 100. The NAV pressure requirement were very lung, like peak pressure was around 30 to 40. So within 3 to 4 days, like 5 days back, he succumbed to death. The thing is, what is the take-home message is, if most of them, like there's no family history of COVID in any adults. The pediatric COVIDs, they are presenting early, but they are milder form. So parents are not taking very seriously. So I had a like 15 days baby just came with just cold. I had some intuition, but I asked mother had mild cold. So I said, we'll do the COVID. So somehow mother agreed to get the COVID. The 15 days baby came positive. Then mother came positive. Then after 5 days, mother required admission because her saturation was 90. So everything went smooth. This also very important is monitor the kids. So most of them, in my experience, doesn't require hospitalization. Okay, this is one. Coming to the management during the pregnancy, pregnancy is like any manner. The priority goes to the mothers. So first priority comes saving the mother. So during the pregnancy, the use of doxy is not advised. Ivermectin is not advised during. So remdesivir can be used during the pregnancy, but there are no teratogenic effects seen till now in any of it because it is used only during the short period. Whatever steroid required for the mother to save the mother can be used. Sometimes antenatal steroid used in the later part of the pregnancy, high dose can cause cerebral palsy. But again, the priority is given for the mother to save the mother life. So whatever regular, if they are mild, moderate, mild symptoms, they can be managed, and antenatally doesn't require much this regular follow-up. What about coming to the lactation mother? So if mother is mild cases, the breastfeeding is advised. One thing they can express and give either through the manual, either through the pump, or else with all the precaution, we wearing the gown and gloves, mother can feed the baby. Mother can feed the baby. This is one. Thing is, if both the mother and pediatric are COVID positive, they can like with all the hygienic precaution, they can stay together. If the mother is COVID positive delivered, generally we are isolating the baby, but we are expressing the mother milk and giving. The option is given to the parents. Like if the mother is not getting adequate, formula feeds can be given, or else donor human milk can be given. The all options to be given, but breast milk till now, the breast milk, the COVID virus is not found, and vertical transmission is very negligible. Very few cases are noted. Even in the vaginal secretion, the COVID virus is not noted. So breastfeeding is advised, and whatever regular medication required during the pregnancy, during the lactation can be advised. So my thing is, we should be well prepared for the wave 3, particularly pediatric. We should be alarmed to the government, well equipped for COVID 3. As of now, pediatric, we are not facing much problem. We are managing most of the cases at home. Thank you one and all for giving this opportunity. Any questionnaires can be taken at the last.
Thank you so much, Surendra sir. This was something which was on high demand. Everybody wanted to know about the pediatric management in pregnancy and lactating mothers. So thank you so much for that. Quickly, I would like to now call upon Dr. N.R. Ramesh Masti. Sir is Professor HOD, member of BBMP COVID-19 Task Force for Public Health Response. Sir is also member of Karnataka Health Vision Group. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I was privileged enough to listen to Dr. Mohan and Dr. Chandrasekhar sir and Surendra's wonderful lecture on the disease. So I will not touch anything about that. But what I would like to tell to all the volunteers out here in this group, what is it we want from you? we want you to be very good listeners. Since you're going to be involved in triaging, we want you to be good counselors. Now, the first thing we want you to do is when you receive a call to minimize the fear, because the person today is bombarded with the forwards of the WhatsApp university and the media, where the minute he's told that the disease is COVID positive, he thinks it's a death warrant. Now, if you can, in your initial call, have a good conversation with him, minimize the fear, and most important, ask him who's the key person in the family. If there are members in the family who are bold, strong, willing to go, and will be there in case they need any help. So that you need to identify, speak to them and tell them about all that you have listened so far about, like we all know now that if there are 100 positives out there, 85 that don't need admissions. They can be managed at home. And there's the remaining 15 where the issue is. So if the what we require is, if you can stop these people from flooding the hospitals, the bed management and the oxygens and the other so-called crisis that is there can be taken care of. Now, there are again, the other thing that you need to know is you're going to get calls from all over India, and you're going to have people from rural India, from tribal India, and India where they would have got your number and they would have called. So you also need to know that how the system works in a rural area and in an urban area. So I would suggest that if you all know that there's a primary health center in a rural area, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, and there is what is known as sub-centers or health and wellness centers, you can ask this person to first reach out to the Anganwadi center in the village, and from there he can go to the sub-center or to the primary health center. And subsequently, most of the taluks in India have these hospitals where COVID care or COVID treatment is being done at the taluka level. So you should be able to guide him in his language in a very calm manner for those of whom who require this sort of the transport. So if you can minimize the fear, speak to them, talk to them, and if you can deviate their attention by telling all the good things that are there, that it's like the first slide data is so beautiful. 98% or 99% of them will come out of the disease. It is just that 1% which requires critical care, and they are the ones who require some sort of interventions. So if you can tell them this, and if you can reassure them, because mental health is as crucial as your physical health. Now, if you don't touch on mental health, and if you're just going to tell them, because like what sir has all mentioned, if there are, they'll go to a quack or they'll go to a physician who will straight away start them on all these drugs which has been told in the 3rd day and 4th day. So this is the kind of scenario we're in, and that's why it's called a pandemic. We are in chaos. Now, this is the first message that I would like to tell. And second message is about vaccination. It's so crucial that people are, there is vaccine hesitancy has minimized to a great extent in the last 10 to 15 days, at least in urban India, but it is still there in rural India. Now, if you can minimize this vaccine hesitancy by telling them that the people who have taken the vaccine will, even if they get the infection, is at the most going to have what is known as mild infection, or otherwise what is known as a very minimum infection. So we have this wonderful guidelines which has been given by the government of India for home management of home isolation. So the other thing is, it's very crucial that you inform the people about the vaccines. We all know that the vaccines, there is an issue now, but hopefully in the next 1 week or 2 weeks, the things are bound to improve. And you will have a villager telling whether I should take Covaxin or Covishield. It does not matter. Ask them to take whichever vaccine is available. We very well know both vaccines prevent serious diseases, prevent deaths. So it doesn't matter which vaccine or what is available. Please ask them to take it. And if these two things are taken care of, one is counseling them, minimizing the fear, they shouldn't rush. As soon as they get diagnosed with the disease, they shouldn't be rushing out of the home to get all the tests done. If you can, calm them for the next 24 hours, and then subsequently, when they are in a calmer state of mind, you can advise them about what the do's and don'ts. Then it becomes, they are also far more comfortable to listen to your advice. So this is what we require from the volunteers. We want you to speak to them. We want you to listen to them. We want you to tell them about the do's and don'ts. You please ask them about their family and other people members. Give them the confidence that they require. And most important, ask them to take the vaccines. And vaccines today are available even in the primary health at the sub-center level. So the ANM will tell them when the vaccines are going to come. They just have to go there and get the shot. So it is going to take some time, this vaccine, but that's the only key message that you need to tell them. So with this, I will stop. I think this will be shared with this particular PDF will be shared with all the volunteers in this particular. Thank you, and I'll be more than willing to take questions.
Thank you so much, sir. Now the forum is open for question and answers. I have already received some questions, and I think I would like to mention them first, and then if there are any other questions other than what's already been discussed, we can open the forum. So initially I got a question about to elaborate about the weaning of steroids in the second week of illness, because this is where most of the confusion is. They're persisting and following different standards. So can one of the panelists please elaborate on weaning of steroids in the second week of illness?
Will you take that, Mohan? See, generally, what I tend to do is, if somebody is on 6 milligrams of dexamethasone for 10 days, then I'll make it on alternate days for next 5 days, and then gradually stop. If it is on 32 milligrams of Medrol, you can make 16 milligrams for 5 days and then 8 milligrams on alternate days and stop. And always be aware in diabetics, it will cause an increase in sugars. So in such cases, probably you can stop within 4 or 5 days looking at the sugar levels, and always take them back to the primary physician. You loop them up to the primary physician for sugar control, because we have seen a lot of people having very high sugars when they go with a very high dose of steroids. See, with 5 to 6 days of steroid therapy, the weaning need not be prolonged. Alternate days for next 5 days and stoppage would not cause any rebound complications if the patient is stable.
Ideally, like for a steroid of less than 8 to 10 days, many studies have shown that there is no need for any tapering of those stages.
Exactly. So, even the infections are not, studies have shown that the rate of infections are also not great.
Not great. Correct.
Right, sir. So on the same lines, there are multiple questions we are seeing about the inhalation budesonide and also the inhalers. So
yeah, I will take.
What comments, sir, on that?
Yeah, the concept of using inhalation budesonide on ICS had come based on the retrospective analysis that patients who are or asthmatic or COPD patients who are already on a regular ICS medication, they tend to have a less severe of illness. So they did a study they did a prospective study later, and it found that the patients who are on inhalation budesonide had a lesser of the severe illness. And the study published in Lancet, they have used AstraZeneca's Pulmicort, I think. It's a dry DPI. So as a pulmonologist and as a practicing physician, everyone knows that if you compare the DPI with the MDI and MDI with spacer, MDI with the spacer, like we tell, it's almost like equal to a nebulizer. So the percentage of drug deposition with the MDI and spacer, if it can be proper, if done properly, can be equivalent to a nebulization form. So we always advise the patients to use MDA with spacer only, not to straight away use the MDA alone. Okay, so MDA with spacer is the best form.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir, so much.
And another question was there about the spacer that we have advised, because most of them are tachypnic. The drug delivery would be more ideal with a spacer, as Dr. Mohan has advised. That's the reason why, because these patients are little tachypnic and they just don't sink the pressing of the inhaler and the deep breaths. So the drug delivery is much better with a spacer.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Jyoti Lakshmi ma'am, you had a question with regard to SpO2 criteria for the triaging. So would you like to ask the question, ma'am? Dr. Jyoti Lakshmi ma'am? Yeah.
Hello, sir. Namaste. Nowadays, we are seeing patients themselves asking us for beds, ICU bed, ventilator bed. We want this bed, that bed. So I don't know how they're having the criteria, what criteria. But I think as doctors now, answering doctors now on teleconsultation, we have to tell them what is the criteria. So I wanted some guidelines for that, sir. Any one of you can please tell, depending on the SpO2 and the cough levels, all that, can you please tell us, sir?
Any oxygen less than 90 would be a hospitalization. And when a patient goes to hospitalization, the doctor triages there. There is no question of a patient triaging himself and asking for a bed. Any saturation less than 90, you refer the patient to hospital. Anything less than 85, probably not to a COVID care center. Between 80 to 85, possibly to a COVID care center. Anything less than 85, probably we would advise you to send it to a hospital.
They are buying oxygen on themselves nowadays. That is the reason I was asking.
No,
they come with SpO2 60 and ask for bed.
No, the problem is there is a panic, non-availability of beds, and everybody wants to protect their life. There are patients asking for beds at 60, 50 on oxygen, not getting beds. So anything less than 85, probably go to the hospital and doctor there triages the patient. And,
thank you, sir.
And if you are asking whether if the bed is not available, goes for an oxygen bed and patient requires a ICU bed, it is very difficult for a tele-triaging person to decide, not seeing the patient, where to send. But our advice is ask them to go to a hospital and then take it forward from there.
Thank you so much, sir. That's what we are telling them. Okay, thank you.
Saturation less than 85 and the tachypnea, like it's also again difficult to assess to triaging. More than 30, the patient can't complete a single sentence. All those things can indirectly tell us that the patient may require definitely hospitalization and also maybe an HDU or ICU, I think.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Praveen.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a question from Dr. Sanjeev Nair on anticoagulation medication. So the question is how to decide how long it should be continued, and what if we see patients who are already on antiplatelets? So your advice on that.
Somebody is on antiplatelets, there is no need to add. If somebody, most of them are on clopidogrel or aspirin. So if somebody is already on, you need not add. Only a steroid with a desaturation or any change in the clinical status post the first week. And generally we tend to keep it for another 7 days and then take a call looking at the SpO2 levels.
Right. So any age criteria that we are specifically following for this, because the news that post-COVID applications,
initially in the first wave, we kept it more than 45. Now seeing so many young people affected, if somebody has a desaturation, we are adding both the anticoagulants and steroids in the second week.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. And there is a question about from Dr. Shobha about the high fever that is
Hello.
noticed on day 7 and 8, and between the third day to seventh day, it's coming
sometimes
back and really high. So you continue them with home steroids or send them to hospital for further evaluation.
no, sometimes fever doesn't respond to paracetamol, but does better with Brufen or naproxen. These have been put forward as alternatives from NICE guidelines UK. So Brufen of 400 mg BD or a naproxen of 200 mg BD can be advised. And also, if somebody has fever on 7th, 8th day, it is better to look at any reason of secondary infections or any infections not related to COVID also.
Thank you, sir.
Right, Shobha ma'am, you wanted to add something? Okay, I think that's all we had for that question. Coming to the question on vaccination, one of the team members wanted to know that do we have a data that after taking all 2 doses of vaccine, is there any report of any death or severe complications that we have noticed? So
yes, we have come across that, but it is a very, very, very rare phenomena, if I have to put it like that. And we'll have to see what were the other reasons why they did get it. It is very rare, very, very rare. But yes, it is not that they didn't have. It's not that we have not reported. We have, but I would say it's very rare.
I would concur with Dr. Ramesh. With 2 vaccines done about 2-3 weeks before, we are seeing very, very less severe infections and patients getting sick.
So one question. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Go ahead, ma'am.
So few patients are asking us, after taking the first vaccine, a few had MI or any chest pain like that, few had to go for angioplasty. So after seeing some messages in the WhatsApp and all, they're asking, is there any necessity to go for CRP before taking the second vaccine?
I would request Dr. Chandrasekhar sir to inform whether we require this.
No, we don't require to look at any CRP. If somebody is going for a angioplasty, I would rather go with the RT-PCR and see if it's not negative, and then go ahead with angioplasty rather than a CRP.
No, sir. Immediately after the first dose, one of my relative only, after 3 days, he had severe chest pain and then he had to go for angioplasty. So whether it, but anyway, he was not COVID before. And then, so that is why, what is the...
Madam, it's like this, madam, the guidelines are, now the second dose of vaccine, if you look at it, it is 2 months after you get, I mean, if he, whatever is the, if he's COVID positive. Now, if it is, if like you're saying it is an MI, and obviously the treating physician will be able to tell whether it is, I mean, if it is because of MI. And if an angioplasty is done 2 weeks down the line, you can obviously take the vaccine. There's no, I mean, whenever is it due? As long as it's not COVID, there's no contraindication at all.
Okay, then there is no need for, I mean, they are telling the CRP just before taking the second vaccine.
No, that is decided by the treating doctor for whatever reason, we don't know. We don't say is it required or not required. What we are saying is it is left to the cardiologist who is going to treat. There may be other reasons to get C-reactive protein is not only raised in COVID. It can be raised for many reasons. There may be other reasons for the doctor to ask for it.
Okay, so thank you very much.
In fact, in most of the cardiologists, if you look at them, they after an angioplasty 2 weeks after them, they are suggesting vaccination. I mean, there's no contraindication for vaccination following an angioplasty.
Okay.
So this is different. What you're asking is different. But if you look at if you go to any of the cardiologists, they are not saying that it cannot be done.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Catherine about GI symptoms that are usually seen associated with COVID and drugs for recommendation. Is it only symptomatic, or are we doing any further investigations in this aspect?
For GI symptoms, just as a symptomatic treatment itself, just like using probiotics and giving IV fluids. And if they have give symptoms of like infective diarrhea, then we have to go with the addition of antibiotics, or else it can just continue as a any other viral infections causing diarrhea. So it's the same thing. Probiotics, IV fluids, and hydrate to maintain adequate hydration. That is sufficient.
Most of the home care patients, as Dr. Mohan said, settle with pre-probiotic. Most of them.
But only point I would like to add is, if they are symptomatic in GI, better they do a COVID test.
Yeah.
Many of the patients present only with GI symptoms. A COVID test is a must, I believe.
Especially elderly patients present with lot of GI symptoms as the first symptom. So any elderly patients come with GI symptoms in the pandemic, as Dr. Nagesh said, it is better to go for a COVID testing. Many atypical presentation is more common in elderly patients.
And last time somebody had asked me in the group regarding appendicitis.
Yeah. Yes.
Regarding appendicitis in COVID. So it is COVID can involve any system in the body. Involving lung is dangerous and it threatens life. Whereas in GI, it can involve and cause any inflammation of any part of the bowel. Similarly, appendix. Because it is a pandemic situation, people tend to go late. That's why more acute appendicitis are presented there.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Swami, you had a question?
Sorry, I'm not a doctor. I'm a clinical nurse specialist working in UK for the last 20 years. We have a team of doctors and nurses. I was speaking to Dr. Jitendra this morning, and he advised me to join this forum. Essentially, a couple of things that we wanted to say. I know there is a scarcity of doctors, and obviously we want to offload some of your workload. We can provide nearly about 30 to 50 nurses who are specialist nurses who are able to triage as per the Manchester triage system. And we can go along with the ICMR guidelines, what has been provided. Even doctors from UK, we are unable to prescribe any medications from here. That's the limitations that we have. And also we do not have any connections to the hospitals where we can refer patients who are currently being home managed. We're currently managing 23 patients since last 3 days. Is there any way we can collaborate with you guys where we can triage the patients and we can only escalate those patients who require medical intervention? Otherwise, they can be home managed. I was just wondering whether we can set up something like that as a joint network. That is one thing. And the second thing is that, the patients who are admitted in the hospital because of this panic episodes, a lot of patients are going there because they're just in case if I require oxygen. That is what I believe is been happening there. So one of the suggestions that we suggested was that we do an oxygen review of all the patients. If the oxygen levels are okay, we can do not all doctors. Some of the junior doctors are running some of the COVID wards at the moment, which is what I understand. My brother is a pediatrician. He works in a public health sector, and he said not all the doctors are experts in managing COVID cases. So in those cases, you have doctors, specialists who are in chest medicine who can do a digital ward rounds, and where the junior doctors can do a present each cases for 10 minutes. So let's say, for example, there are 20 patients in the ward, and the junior doctors will present the patient, and then they reduce the oxygen. And by the time they review the 20th patient, they can go back to the patient 1 and see whether the oxygen requirement is reduced. In that case, those patients can be early discharged rather than keeping them for 10 days. That will offload some of the hospital beds. So that's one of the suggestions I thought I could make.
Nagesh, sir, you're muted, sir.
Wonderful,
Mr.
Swami.
We've lost Dr. Swami.
I'm sure your points have been noted by Dr. Praveena. She will get back to you on this, Mr. Swami. Many thanks for your inputs. I'm sure we'll figure out a way to incorporate your team so that you can be of much needed help to us, sir. So I'll coordinate with Dr. Praveena to somehow try to figure out a way we can incorporate what you suggested. Many thanks
Thank
to
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
If we are done, shall we wind up, or is there any more questions, Dr. Praveena?
Yeah, the questions are just pouring in.
Yeah.
There is one last question, a repetitive question I'm seeing is about management of COVID in cancer patients who are on chemotherapy. So if one of the panelists can address this, I think we can close after this.
The management would essentially be same, but the somebody had also asked if somebody is already on steroids, do they require to be added up? No. If somebody, for whatever reason, is on steroids, can be continued, and there is no need to add fresh steroids. And any immunosuppressant patients are high risk. They are to be vaccinated on a priority. And if they get COVID, probably the treatment management is nothing different. It is going to be essentially same, but the risk of a severe disease is much higher.
Also, the risk of secondary infection is higher in these patients.
Right, sir. I did see a question on one last question here on mucormycosis, which has been being discussed a lot. I was even asked.
My take on that is we are pumping in too much of steroids and too much of immunosuppressants, hoping that it's going to prevent the cytokine storm. People are giving supraphysiological doses of steroids, and that is the reason why we see so much of fungal infections in India. Nowhere in the world it has been reported to that an extent. It's all kind of a irrational usage of steroids which is leading to it.
Right.
It's basically a fungal infection which is coming secondary to higher immunosuppression.
Right.
I think, yeah.
Right.
People who have seen, who have got experience with mucormycosis have told that diabetic, uncontrolled diabetes with high dose steroids with external oxygen requirement, these three things are like causing for increase in the chance of mucormycosis. So because the devices, oxygen devices like the whatever we are using and the water levels, like they may be like harboring these fungal infections, and with uncontrolled diabetes and high steroids, they are causing as a they're giving a option for the fungus to grow. So we need to take care of the devices itself also.
Right. Right. Thank you, sir. One last question I've been asked is pertaining to Dr. Surendra. Somebody wanted to know if kids who are being told that they will be affected more in the third wave, will it help if a flu shot is given to the kids in the meantime before a vaccine for them is indicated? As of now, kids aren't being administered vaccines. So would a flu shot help is what was the question.
Definitely no, sir, because flu vaccine is totally different from the COVID vaccine. But definitely we don't know whether this flu shot is giving cross protection. But anyhow, every June we are going to do flu shot for any kids less than 10 years. So annual flu shot, they need to take it. Whether how much protection it gives to COVID, it's not known, but it is recommended to take, because what we are seeing is the flu, whatever H1N is more serious in kids. Like compared to COVID, H1N1 is more dangerous to kids than COVID.
Right.
So it is definitely advised. In India, we need to push for vaccination in kids, at least till 12 years of and above. We need to push for vaccination, because currently we made it 18 years.
Right, sir.
So yeah.
Right. Right. Thank you so much, sir. With that, I think we will wind up the question and answer session. Any other questions which might have been overlooked or left, I'm sure we have it recorded in the chat box, and I'm sure we will go through it and pose it to the panelists, and we'll get back to the participants. That I'm sure, because it's really not possible to take up all questions one by one. So we will do what is required to answer all questions to all participants. With that, I would now like to call upon Dr. Hemant. principal of the Anand Sagar College of Dental Sciences, to propose the vote of thanks for this program, to thank the panelists and the gathering. Dr. Hemant, sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnanand. A very good evening to all the doctors. At the outset, I would first like to thank all our esteemed panelists uh, who have given their precious time, and it's indeed our privilege to have everyone here. First and foremost, Dr. Mohan, in fact, he had a night duty continuing this session, but with our request, sir agreed to be with us. From our bottom of my heart, we thank you, sir, for all your inputs, especially your first slide gave us a statistic which shows not to get panic with the figures of what the number of people are affected and what the severity people numbers which you showed. It shows a positive and a very clear way of a pulmonologist can give an insight about this COVID, and most of the doctors have been clarified with a lot of doubts in their mind. Second and most wanted in our panel always is Dr. Chandrasekhar, who makes it very simple and any person in our team can understand easily, and always sir has made it so simple so that this COVID not to get panic to do even telemedicine, or even our doctors have been posted next to CCC, that is COVID care centers also. Now I think they are more confident in handling and dealing these things with a simplified talk by our Dr. Chandrasekhar sir. Sir, thank you for even every time we have been troubling you, but still your talk and your information has made a lot of difference for this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anand.
Next is Dr. Ramesh, who's always been a positive. Seeing himself look so positive in, especially community medicine people plays a major role in this. Last time also he told, psychological aspect is more important. And all said and done, he told is all the people who are in this participants should be a good listeners. It's a very good take-home message for us, where we need to be patient and listen, and psychologically we should boost them up. And lastly, which he told is the vaccination. Yes, there is no doubt. Due to little delay in our vaccination has led to all these things which a lot of people tell. So we will definitely take your two things very seriously, sir. And definitely all our participants will take up these tips, what you gave.
Thank you, sir.
Lastly, Dr. Surendra, sir, this was one thing everyone used to ask for, especially these participants when Dr. Pravina requested that DGYM wanted all the doctors to be trained by these panelists. Most demanding was Surendra's topic. Most of them, everyone are scared with this coming third wave. Everyone has been panic about this. Next will be kids, and next effect will be a lot of kids and children will be affected. So Surendra's talk was very informative. A lot of things was clarified, and I really thank Dr. Surendra joining us and made it very simple. And all our participants have gained a lot of knowledge with your talk. With this,
thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. With a lot of inputs given by this panelist, on behalf of our NMO and RSS Seva Bharati, I thank everyone. And I also thank Tejasvi Surya for giving his guest appearance and giving a moral boosting. He only requested two things: work number of hours more, and more number of doctors to join. That's how we had a last setup for putting a lot of dentists, Ayush, and joining hands and helping our medical fraternity, so that they are also getting tired day and night working. So we are all there with them also. So these two things definitely will take up, sir. Definitely our participants have been the enthusiasm which they showed will definitely work in more numbers, and definitely join more number of doctors to this pandemic to help. And next and last, our NMO team, which is have definitely worked and working also with lot of, not only with these things, there are a lot of things back end which are working. I would like to thank our team, first and foremost, Devanandji, who's always been in our NMO platform, where decisions are taken very, spontaneously, and which leads us to, percolate to all the thing where COVID situations are rising, and it has thanks to a lot of doctors and other who's also in our team who has helped us for all these things, and Dr. Satish, our endocrinologist, Dr. Jitendra, my colleague, helping and to do all these programs. I thank each and every one of NMO team. Lastly, I'll fail if I don't thank Dr. Pravina and Dr. Krishnanand, who have done a work, and a lot of our participants are happy with this session. I thank both of you for a good moderating this session. So this is how we can join hands with our medical doctors and able to shorten the burden, at least to an extent where we be a part of it. So in this critical time, let's all fight together and overcome this dreaded disease. With these few, each and everyone for being with us, panelists, participants, everyone, I thank each and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemant sir. Thank you for your closing remarks. Thanks to all the panelists who were kind enough to spare the precious time in these critical times to talk to all of us, educate us on how to deal with patients and all that. Thank you to Dr. Pravina for being such a wonderful co-moderator. Thank you all.
Lastly, Krishnanand, I would like to thank Dr. Nagesh,
yes,
who is the main coordinator for all our speakers here, who are panelists here, who's a director of gastroenterology, a very close friend of mine, who's willing to help anytime, any given time. And I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Nagesh. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nagesh. Thank you for all the support and help that you've given all of us. Thank you, sir. I hope this session was helpful to all participants. All your queries would be answered in due time. Thank you for your time and patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all. Yeah, bye-bye.